In the 50 years that I've been woodworking, I've bought a lot of tools. Most of them I still have, but there's some tools that I bought that I eventually decided just weren't worth having, and I went ahead and got rid of them. But the bigger mistake isn't the tools I bought that I shouldn't have bought, it's the tools that I should have bought that I didn't. Part of it is that we aren't really aware of what we need when we start out. It takes time to learn, and it takes time to appreciate some of the, we could say, finer tools, okay? I've got a series of tools here I want to show you, and these are things that are all under $30 that I think are tools that every woodworker needs, and I'll explain to you why, okay? A lot of these you'll find are associated with layout, and the reason I've spent so much time on that area is I find that one of the biggest problems a lot of woodworkers have is laying out their projects properly and setting up their tools accurately. You know, we all start out with a tape measure and a carpenter's pencil, right? And we think that's going to do the trick for us. Well, if you're doing carpentry, yeah, it will. But if you're doing woodworking, you need much more accuracy. And so we need more accurate tools. We also need more accurate pencils. And so we're going to look at some of those, but we're also going to look at other types of tools. And these are things that I basically use all the time. They're tools that may not be in your kit, and I've tried really to stick to tools that probably aren't in your kit. I mean, telling you that you need a cordless drill is kind of a joke. You already know that. Telling you that you need a square is kind of a joke because you know that. But there are things that maybe you don't have, or you have something that's just not good enough, and you haven't realized the need to go for something a little bit better. And a little bit better doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a lot more money. So we're going to take a look at these tools and see what sort of things I think every woodworker needs in their toolkit. And everything here is available for under $30. The first tool I want to mention to you is an automatic center punch. Now, you may not think of this as a woodworking tool, and I'll have to be honest, for years I didn't think of it as a woodworking tool either, even though I had one from back in my engineering days. You use a center punch when you're going to mark metal where you're going to drill, because your drill bit will skid all over the metal instead of starting to bite in if you don't have an indentation there. Well, I found that the same thing can happen with wood. Maybe not to the same extreme, but it can still happen. Unless you have a positive indicator of where that hole's got to be, then your drill bit may not start in where you want it to. Wood grain can cause the drill bit to bounce over even as much as a half of a hole width. And that's absolutely unacceptable in just about anything in woodworking. So you need to get that drill started where it's supposed to be, and this allows you to do it. Nice thing is that's not a very expensive tool. You can buy one of these for 10 bucks. And I've got a couple of them, and I've had them for years and years and years, and they do the job. I often have one in my pocket, or I'll have it right here on my workbench, and that makes it possible to make sure that that hole ends up where I want it to. The second thing I'd like to mention is a moisture meter. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't own a moisture meter until at least 45 years of being a woodworker, okay? What a moisture meter does is tell you the moisture level or the moisture content of the wood you're about to work with. This is important because if we use wood that's got too much moisture in it, we're just asking for it to warp. We're asking for our projects to get ruined. I see new woodworkers post things on the internet all the time asking why their tabletop that they just edge glued together the day before is warped or it's wavy. And some people say, oh, you need to alternate the direction of the grain so that it gets smiles and frowns from the end grain and blah, blah, blah. That's not the problem. It really isn't. The problem is that the wood had too much moisture in it. And as the wood dries, it's going to warp one way or another. So a moisture meter helps prevent that by letting you know how much moisture it is there is in it. Now, this is a pretty inexpensive moisture meter I have here. It's the only one I ever owned, and I think I paid like $12 for it. It's not real expensive. You can spend a lot more. You can spend up to $100 on it. But there's an awful lot of moisture meters out there in the $12 to $30 range that'll do the job for you and do it well. Every woodworker needs a good dust mask. Now, a lot of us accustomed to use the disposable ones, and I'm not saying they don't work. They do, but they don't last long, and that's the problem. A good dust mask like this, it really is pretty much the same sort of mask, but it's much more durable and lasts much longer. Or you combine the kind that's like a plastic shield with a rubber gasket, and then it's got the little cans that are the filters. Those are even better. Now, you need a good dust mask because we make lots of dust, you know. I took 20 gallons of dust out of here this last Saturday when I was doing a cleanup of my shop. That was a lot of dust. And granted, I hadn't vacuumed and I hadn't cleaned for quite a while, so it was probably more than it should have been. Nevertheless, dust is a part of our lives, and dust is not good for our lungs. And so we need to protect ourselves. Not only do we need to protect ourselves, but we need to protect anyone that comes and visits our shop. Now, those disposable masks will work great for visitors. You know, if the kids come to visit, if your spouse comes to visit, a buddy comes into the shop, hand them a mask. Let them use the disposable mask, and then you can throw it away afterwards. But as far as for your own mask, spend the money to get yourself a good one. This kind that I've got retails for about $20. The plastic ones you can get for $30. And that's really not a lot of money when we're talking about your health. The next tool I think that every woodworker needs is brad point drill bits. Now, I've used brad point drill bits for years. And as you can see, I've got a block here with my brad points and my spade bits all in the same set. That's just for convenience. But what makes brad point drill bits unique is that they've got a very sharp center point as opposed to the points you find on regular twist drills. Regular twist drills are actually designed to use with metal. They're not designed for use with wood. Yes, you can cut wood with them. You can cut just about anything with them. But that doesn't mean they do it the best. The big bonus of working with brad point drill bits is that that point goes right into that hole that you've made, that indentation you made with your center punch, and it's going to center that hole exactly right. It also works great if you're trying to do a curved surface, an angled surface, or anything else where a drill bit is likely to skid. Now, brad point drill bits really aren't that expensive. You can buy a set of 6 to 8 bits for somewhere in the range of $10 to $20, and they'll last you for years. Something really useful to buy that may not seem like much of a deal is a steel ruler. Now, this is stainless steel. It's double-sided. I've got 4 scales on here for 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, 32nds, and 64ths. It's a foot long. Now, actually, I've got more than one of these. I've got a 6-inch steel ruler. I've got this 12-inch, and I've got an 18-inch. But the one I find myself using all the time is this 12-inch. It's just a convenient size to work with. Being steel, or stainless steel, it's very stable in its dimensions. It does not expand and contract much. The engraving of the lines for the measurements is very fine and therefore very accurate. So I can be sure that I'm getting a very accurate measurement when I'm trying to lay something out or trying to measure something, like measuring the size of a hole, for example. Okay. Can you get by with something cheaper? Well, you can, but you're going to lose some accuracy. I've used plastic rulers. I've used wooden school rulers. They work. I've used yardsticks. They work, but not to the degree of accuracy that this does. What you're paying for here is accuracy, and you're really not paying that much. This is under $10, and this will last you the rest of your life. So why not spend the money and get accurate measurements? I'm sure you probably have a square, whether it's a tri-square or a speed square. I mean, that's one of those things we all tend to buy fairly early on, and they're very, very useful. But I think you probably need another square, and what I mean is a really, really small square. And this is a 2-inch stainless steel square. And I've had this thing for years. And why do you need a little square? Well, because sometimes we work on little stuff. Take this little block of wood right here. You know, if I was to take a regular tri-square and I'm trying to find the center, this is just too awkward to work with, and especially because it's got this 45-degree angle here. They don't all have that, but this one does. You know, it's just sometimes you need something smaller to work with. And that's where the really small square comes in. This has got a ruler on it already, so it's calibrated for you. And because it's so little, it's great for doing anything where you've got a little stuff going on. Now, I don't know about you, but I find myself with a lot of projects that have some little pieces in them, or even some little projects. And having the little square to work with makes it a whole lot easier for me to accurately measure how I need to set up those pieces so that they'll come out right. The next little tool that I think everybody needs, and a lot of us don't have, is a center finder. Now, there's a couple different styles of this. This is just a very inexpensive plastic center finder that I found. And you know, for years, what I did to find the center of a piece of wood is I take my little square and I make a couple marks on the wood and draw a line. And yeah, that works. But it's a whole lot easier to take this, set it on there, stick my pencil in there, and make the line. It's a much, much easier way of finding that center. Why is that important? Well, what are you trying to make? Some types of joinery, you need to be able to make that marking and get it correct. If you're doing a mortise and tenon, if you're doing dowels, you may need to be able to mark it that way. Sometimes if you just need to resaw a piece of wood, you need to be able to find exactly where that center is and mark it accurately. This is an inexpensive tool. I think this is like a $7 tool, okay? But for that $7, what you've got is not only do you have the center finder, but you also have steps on both sides, which allow you to mark distances from, I think the smallest is 1/8, and the biggest is up to 1/2 inch from an edge. All right, say you're putting together a box, and you need to put, and you're doing it out 3/4 inch thick material, and you put screws in that are going to come right into the middle of the adjoining piece. That's 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, well, use that stepped function, and you can do that 3/8 of an inch line, and you're going to get your screws lined up correctly. I don't know how many times through the years I've tried to eyeball things like that to put my screws in. Yeah, that didn't work out real well. More often than not, I end up with screws that were coming out the outside or coming out the inside, especially if I didn't bother to do pilot holes. With this, I can make sure that comes out right every single time. More and more of us are using orbital and random orbital sanders for our sanding, and that's because they're good. They sand quickly and they give you a good finish. But a lot of us are using regular sandpaper or the hook and loop discs that are made for them with the holes already in them, and those are okay. But 3M has come out with something better. They call it their Xtract system, and it's a hook and loop sandpaper for use with these sanders, but it's porous. So sandpaper can go right through, or I mean, the sanding dust can go right through the paper instead of doing like it's done here and clogging up. It's a great step upward. Now, it actually looks like you're getting cheated because not the entire surface is covered with sanding grit, but it's the areas that are not covered with sanding grit that make all the difference. Now, I don't have one here to show you right now, but when you use that and you put it on there, not only are you going to get, your sanding is going to happen faster because you're not going to get this clog up, but you're going to get more of your sawdust ending up in the catchment system, whether it's something like this or you're connected to a vacuum or something like that, then this type will do. So that makes it worthwhile. Anything we can do to keep the dust out of the air is certainly worth doing. You can buy a sample pack of the Xtract sanding discs for $10, or you can buy a pack of 50 for $30. Next thing every woodworker needs is good brushes for finishing. Now, this is actually a brush for painting. It's not for finishing because it's a synthetic bristle. For varnish and for stains, ideally you want a natural bristle, what they call China bristle. And the bristles will be black or white, depending, okay? Usually they're black. What's so important about a good brush? Basically, a good brush is going to lay the material down more smoothly. Now, I'm talking about your varnishing specifically, more smoothly with less lumps, less bubbles, and you'll get a better finish out of it. A lot of guys try and get a good finish using cheap brushes, or like foam brushes, or like the dollar disposable type brushes. No, if you want a good finish, you have to buy good brushes. And really good brushes aren't that expensive. Brushes typically will run, good quality brushes, in the $12 to $15 range. Now the problem with them is that you have to clean them. And that's why a lot of people go and use cheap brushes. You'll need mineral spirits or paint cleaner to clean out your varnish, unless of course you're using a water-based varnish, and also to clean out your stain, again, unless you're using water-based. Yes, it takes a little bit of extra time to clean the brush out, but what you end up with is brushes that'll not only do a better job for you, but will last. Now this is a fairly new brush actually, but I've got brushes around here that I've had for 12, 15, 20 years that are still going strong because I've kept cleaning them out and taking care of them. Sometimes I don't do as good a job of cleaning them out, and what ends up happening is the brushes end up ruined and I have to replace them. Next thing I'm going to recommend actually goes against what I do myself. This is one of those cases, do what I say and not what I do. And this is what I would do if I was to do it all again. And that is, rather than buying F-clamps, whether we're talking about the screw thread type or the fast acting, I would buy pipe clamps. The reason I buy pipe clamps is you get more bang for your buck. You can buy pipe clamps, the head and the tail of it, for $10 to $15, depending on the brand and where you buy it. And then you just need a piece of pipe. And the nice thing about them is you can just swap out the pipe if you need a shorter or longer clamp. these clamps cost more. Not only do they cost more, but you're stuck at a particular length. I've had times when I'm using a 36-inch clamp for something that I need about 8 inches because I've run out of shorter clamps. Well, if I was using pipe clamps, all I need to do is just have more pieces of pipe sitting around. Ultimately, it's a better deal. Not only that, but ultimately you get more clamping force in those cases where you need more clamping force. Now be careful that you don't overdo it, because I see a lot of people over clamping. So you really don't want to do that. But with bar clamps, you're going to be able to get things clamped properly, and you're going to do it at a reasonable cost. You know, everyone says they need more clamps. Well, this is a way to get more clamps without spending a lot of money. Another tool that I think everyone needs is a flush cut saw. Now this one's a DeWalt, but they're not the only ones that have them. There are other companies that have them. This particular one is double-sided, which I like because it allows me to get at what I'm cutting from either side. I use this more than anything when I'm doweling, when I've got a dowel protruding and I need to cut it flush, whether that dowel is plugging a hole from doing pocket hole joinery, or where I'm joining with the dowels. Either way, you need a flush cut saw to cut it smooth. And these are a handy little tool to have, and they're not very expensive. I think this is about $12 for this one. Now there are others that are more expensive out there, but you know, this is the second one of these I've had. The first one I literally wore it out to the point where the teeth got dull before the blade broke. But that one lasted for years, and this one I've had now for I think 4 years, and it's lasted me very well. And so it's a specialty tool, I'll have to give it that. And you're not going to use it every single day, but when you need a flush cut saw, nothing else is going to do the job just right. If you try and use any sort of a regular saw, what you can end up with is putting scratches all over the surface of your wood. A flush cut saw doesn't have the teeth set outward, they're set flush so that they don't scratch, and there's no back, you know, like some saws have a back on them, causing the saw to set at an angle so that it's trying to cut into the wood instead of across the surface of the wood. Flush cut saw, for the little bit you have to spend on one, is well worth having. I like to recommend that you get yourself a plastic-faced mallet. Now, this is not something you commonly see in woodworking. Most people will either use a wood carver's mallet, or they'll use a wood mallet, and there's nothing wrong with that. The advantage to something like this is that this is non-marring. Now, if you're putting something together with a wood mallet that's made out of a hardwood, like say maple, walnut, oak, people make them out of all kinds of materials, the mallet may be a harder wood than the wood that you are trying to pound together. What does that mean? Well, that basically means that you're going to mar the wood. Okay? You may as well be using a steel or an iron-headed hammer. Plastic-coated headed hammer, on the other hand, isn't going to mar anything. Now, this isn't a very expensive tool. You can get these for about $18. I have had this one for years and years, from my engineering days. That's actually when I bought it. We used to use them in the machine shop for pounding metal pieces together. But they work just as well for wood, and I am so glad I got this. One of my most useful measurement tools is this angle finder, digital angle finder. Now, this is specifically designed for finding out an existing angle. But what I use it for is setting up my table saw more than anything else, specifically setting the blade angle. And that means, you know, whether it's at 90 degrees or say I'm cutting at 45 and I need to change the blade angle. This is a whole lot more accurate than using the gauge that's on the front of the saw. It's also useful for setting the miter gauge on the saw. Okay, I need to set my miter gauge to 90 degrees so my crosscuts come out good, or I need to set it to 45 degrees, or whatever angle I need to set it to. This makes that very easy because this is extremely accurate. And even a cheap one is accurate because when you take this thing and you close it and turn it on, it's zeroed at that point, zeroed at close. And so no matter what you do, it's going to stay accurate. If you want to check it, then you just open it up all the way, put it on your flat surface, and it'll be 180 degrees. 0 and 180, and you know, if it's got both of those readings, you know it's going to stay accurate. This is about a $15 tool. And they also come longer, by the way. I have a longer one as well. But this 6-inch one is good for most things. And it allows me to really set up my table saw accurately. Speaking of digital measurement tools, I want to mention a digital caliper. Now this may not seem like something you would use for woodworking, and in reality it's not something you'd use all the time. It used to be that calipers were very expensive, and these were used predominantly by machinists. Nowadays you can buy calipers for $12, $15, $20. I've seen a number of them for that price range, on up to say 30. You can find a number of different models. This particular one, this is Pittsburgh, and that means it came from our good friends at Harbor Freight, but it's still very accurate. This will get you measurements in 1/1000th of an inch. That's 1 followed by 3 zeros, okay? Why would you need something like this? You've got screws, and you need to know what size the screws are so you can drill a clearance hole. That's something you would use it for. You've got a piece of hardware that you've got to inset into a cabinet you're making, maybe a jewelry box, maybe some other thing, and you need to measure the width accurately. Use the calipers. It's good anytime you need very accurate measurement. It'll measure outside dimension. In other words, here's my finger, right? It's measuring the outside of my finger, how wide it is. It'll measure inside dimension. So I've got a space here between my fingers, and I can use this side to measure inside. And I can even measure depth with this little piece tail that sticks out. So if I want to know, say, the depth of this, assuming this is a hole or something, I can just run it right down in there and it'll tell me the depth. So it gives me 3 different ways of measuring. The digital ones that they have now, which are much better than the dial calipers I started out with, will give you measurements in inches, in millimeters, and even in fractions. So it gives you a lot of different ways to get your measurements anytime you need a very accurate measurement of anything, in this case up to about 6 inches. Next thing I would recommend that everyone have in their workshop, and you may want to have a couple of these in your workshop, is a pencil sharpener. Now come on, this is a 99-cent item. It's not like it's really expensive. You know, back when I was learning from my dad, we used carpenter pencils and we'd sharpen them with our pocket knife, and you end up with a really poor point on that. And your line, if you're lucky, is going to be about a 1/16 of an inch wide instead of something wider than that. That's not accuracy. If you're trying to do fine joinery, if you're trying to do dovetails, box joints, even a half lap joint or something like that, and you need to know where that center is, plus or minus a 1/16 of an inch isn't good enough. Get yourself a pencil sharpener and sharpen your pencils and do it accurately. Now, I've got to confess, I don't have a pencil sharpener here in my workshop, and that's because I use mechanical pencils. And this mechanical pencil has lead that's 1/2 millimeter wide. Now, I hear a lot of people say that they lose pencils in their shop all the time. I even hear people say, I just bought a box of 500 pencils so that I wouldn't lose them all. Well, I use this pencil all the time and I don't lose it. It's either in my pocket or on my workbench, or if I'm working at the radial arm saw, it'll be on the radial arm saw table. Those are the only place it ever is. I don't lose it. I get it that people lose their pencils in their workshop, and if you do, hence the idea of having more than one sharpener, so I can have pencils all over the place. If that's what works for you, that's fine. But for me, a mechanical pencil works much better. Next thing I'd like to recommend is a wood carving mallet. Now, if you happen to have a lathe, this doesn't cost you anything to make. You just turn on the lathe. I turned this one out of an old, actually rather punky chunk of oak branch. And you can see that there's places where the wood's somewhat rotted. The really great thing about a carver's mallet is that they're designed to work with a chisel so that you don't have to pay attention to what face of that mallet is going to hit the chisel, because wherever it hits, it's still good. Now you take a regular mallet or regular hammer, let me use my plastic fit, you know, that's not a very big head, and I might miss, or I might end up, I'm not paying attention, I'm not holding it right, I might hit with the side, or I might hit an angle and get a glancing blow, end up hitting my hand. The wood carver's mallet is designed to get around that. Now you can buy wood carver's mallets. I looked on Amazon, I saw an assortment of them ranging up to about $30. But as I said, if you've got a lathe, or you got a buddy that's got a lathe, you can make yourself one for absolutely nothing. Here's another no-cost tool you can make for yourself, and that's a glue bottle opener. Now, we've all had the problem with glue bottles where we're fighting to try and get that thing open because the glue is dried and it's glued shut, right? So make yourself a little thing like this. This has got a notch here that the glue bottle nozzle will fit in, okay? And then this allows me to hang it on a wall, the corner of my workbench, whatever. I've got one on this side of my workbench, one on that side of my workbench, and one on the workbench over there. I've got 3 of them here in my workshop. And what this does for me is, instead of struggling with that, I can just slip that in, the bottle in, so that this notch grabs the nozzle, and it's a little hard to do this freehand. Yeah, it doesn't work as easy when it's not mounted. Anyway, it allows me to pop it open. Okay, I can't get any leverage because the way I'm holding it. But so that's 2 pieces of little scrap wood is what that is. All right, this one's a 1/4 inch thick. This is a 1/2 inch thick. This one's got 2 holes in it for mounting it to whatever surface. This one, I drilled a 1/2 inch hole, and then I flared it out with I used a scroll saw. You could use a jigsaw or a coping saw, so that it comes out to about 3/4 of an inch out here. Okay, so at this end, it'll just slip over, but back in here, it's going to grab it tight. And because it's going to grab it tight, I can use that to pull that lid open and have easy access to my glue. No cost, makes life easier. Next tool I'd like to mention is something maybe you wouldn't think of as a tool. You might think of it more as a supply, okay? And that's double-sided masking tape. I use this stuff all the time. This is my go-to clamp of choice. If I've got to clamp oddball things together, if I've got to clamp something to my workbench top, clamp it to one of my power tools, whatever, this stuff is great. Now, it's not cheap, I'll tell you that, okay? You're going to spend like $15 for a roll of this stuff. And it comes in different widths. I use 1 inch the most, but you can get up to 2 inches wide, just like you can buy masking tape like that. And it's got a paper liner, so you stick it on your whatever, your workpiece, and get it smoothed out on there, and then peel off the liner and stick it to your workbench. Or like I said, you can stick 2 pieces together. It's great when you need to stick a template to a piece of wood so that you can use a router with that template, maybe to cut the outside, maybe to cut out a letter on the inside, whatever it might be. Great for anything like that. Very handy. Really, for the amount you use it, it's not that expensive. I said it's fairly expensive to buy. It's about 18 bucks to buy that roll, but I've had this roll for over a year. So I guess 18 bucks a year isn't all that bad, okay? Lighting is a problem in a lot of people's workshops. It actually has been in mine for most of my life. Now, I've got a lot of lighting in here because I'm shooting video. But before I started shooting video, I still didn't have enough light. The lights that I had, which are some of those, they call them garage lights, and they're LED, and they got like 3 or 4 wings. I thought I had great lighting in here until I got some more lighting in here for video and realized how poor the lighting was. Well, one of the ways I made up for that is with these. These are magnetic-based LED spotlights or area lights. And I've got these mounted on several of my tools. There's one right here on this drill press. There's one on my belt sander. There's one on my scroll saw. This one actually was on my lathe. And what this does allows you to get light right where you need it. Now, these things are not all that expensive. I actually bought them through eBay some time back, and I know I paid less than 10 bucks a piece. I just looked on Amazon. I saw a couple different models from $12 to $18 price range. They give you a lot of light right where you need it, and because they're LED, they're going to last for a long, long time. So it's worth having. Now, you could have one and move it around. I don't like doing that. That's why I've got several of them, and I've got them in all the places where I think I'm going to need that extra little bit of light, even with all the lighting I've got in this workshop. The last thing I want to mention to you is a double-sided Japanese saw. Now, there's a specific name for this in Japanese. I don't know what it is. I never bothered to learn, and I probably would have forgotten it anyway. The reason it's double-sided is this side has bigger teeth than this. This is for ripping. This is for cross-cutting, okay? You can spend a lot of money on these, all right? And don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that you just go grab any brand. However, DeWalt has come out with one, and this is $20. And this is a great saw. I much prefer working with a pull saw, one that does the cutting action on the pull stroke, rather than a more traditional push saw where it does the cutting action on the push stroke, okay? I find it much easier to cut with. I've got better leverage, but more importantly, I've got more accuracy. And that's really, to me, what it's all about. This type of saw gives me much more accuracy in my cut because I can control it much better, and I can also see the line much better where I'm cutting. So I highly recommend, if you've never tried working with a pull saw, that you get yourself one. And that's a low-cost way of getting started with a pull saw. So there we have it. That's 20 different tools we've just looked at in a matter of just a little while. All of which I think are tools that there's a good chance maybe you don't have. Or if you have, like in the case of paintbrushes, maybe you don't have what you really need, okay? None of these are high-dollar tools. Everything I've talked about is available for under $30, and in many cases under $20. There are things that I think will be useful to you, and that's why I bring them up. I'm not just trying to sell you something here. I'm not getting any money off of these, okay? What I'm trying to say is these are tools that you can buy and use, and you'll find that they were well worth your money. Rather than spending money on big expensive tools that maybe don't do the job, spend your money on the tools you really need. In my opinion, if you're going to do general woodworking, these tools, every single one of them, is something that's going to be worth your investment, and it's going to make your woodworking much easier and make your life much simpler.